USC will be looking forward to being a playoff participant in years to come. What can they draw from the games of the past 10 days or so, and specifically this annihilation that we saw on Monday night at SoFi Stadium? Welcome to Trojans Live right here, the voice of college football. Matt Semick's on the line as always. Otherwise, we don't have a show. We don't have a channel probably without Matt. So Matt's work has been tremendous here, and we've enjoyed the conversation with Matt each and every Monday night. And catch Matt's work at Trojans Wire. Matt, how you doing?
You know, this turned into a spicy show, like, like Georgia 65, TCU 7, and, what's to talk about from a USC perspective. But then the news hits Tuesday midday around lunchtime that Lincoln Riley and USC are officially retaining Alex Grinch as defensive coordinator. And Lincoln Riley says no coaches except for elevating Luke Heward into a full-time role. So that means Dante Williams stays on the staff. It means no special teams coordinator is hired. So, yeah, we have a lot to talk about tonight.
Okay, so Alex Grinch retained. I got to think a couple things are working here. One would be that Lincoln Riley knows that he brought Alex Grinch all the way from Oklahoma and is going to give him maybe a little bit more rope than he would others. So that's my first thought. My second thought is that obviously the offense was upgraded substantially more than the defense for this first Lincoln Riley edition. And so there's also some thought given to, I want to fully equip this coach, this coordinator, Alex Grinch, with the type of defensive personnel before I give him a full evaluation on what he could possibly do with a USC type of defense from a personnel standpoint. And then also just, not one season typically being enough to get a coordinator fired at any program, even if it's a disappointment.
Yeah, I think the first point you made is particularly salient, and for USC fans who are upset, look, I feel you. I can understand that you would be upset. You have every right to be upset. You should be upset, okay? But just in terms of the politics, you mentioned it, Mark, that Lincoln Riley's not going to take Alex Grinch with him to USC and fire him in a year. Like, I never thought this was a likely outcome, that Lincoln Riley actually would fire him. I do reiterate my stance that, making a run at Jim Leonard of Wisconsin, if you can do that, you should certainly try. You might not succeed, but you should certainly try. It doesn't seem as though that happened. And so, I'm not here talking to USC fans in particular here at the Voice of College Football. I'm not saying oh, this is the right move, but I am saying no one should have expected a firing to occur. Precisely for what you said, that Grinch's loyalty to Lincoln Riley, it's not going to mean 1 year and you're out. And again, even for the worst, fiercest Alex Grinch skeptic or critic, it was still plain as day that USC did not have the personnel on defense. So viewed through that lens, you give Grinch a second year to prove himself, to get guys more integrated into the system. And this is it. 2023 is the prove it year. Not to have a dominant defense, but to have a significantly better defense. Not maybe in the top 55 or 60. If you can at least get that, not be 80th, 85th, wherever USC ended up. If you can just make some notable improvements, given that the offense is loaded. And the last time you and I talked, Mark, we didn't have the Marshawn Lloyd edition from South Carolina. So the running back room is going to be much deeper than it was last year, where it was Travis Dye basically doing it all most of the season. Now you have Austin Jones coming back, Marshawn Lloyd, Raleek Brown, Darwin Barlow, and the incoming recruits from the trail. Very deep running back room. So the offense just continues to be upgraded. Bart Willoughby in the comments asked the question, is Alex Grinch the reason why SC is losing out on the top defensive recruits? So like, that's the salient question. And I did bring it up on our most recent show last Thursday. Like, if the internal analysis pointed to Alex Grinch having a chilling effect on the influx of portal talent and recruiting talent, that's where USC really had a decision to make. And so one would think that Lincoln Riley and his team are studying the situation. They're saying, no, Alex Grinch is not the reason that people aren't coming here. So, if that is their analysis, and one has every reason to think that is their analysis, then okay, like you go back for year 2, and you try and get it better. So like, it's not the decision I would personally make, or at least I would have at least tried to make a run at Jim Leonhard first. But like, I get it. And there's certainly a coherent philosophy. And also Lincoln Riley is being loyal to Alex Grinch. And Grinch did have to come to USC from Oklahoma in a heartbeat. Like, that was a snap decision that Grinch made. It's not as though he had a lot of time to make it. And so to that extent, Lincoln Riley put Grinch in a bind. But so Lincoln Riley is not going to then fire Grinch after 1 year, when, again, we knew that USC didn't have the personnel. So like, it's a fair thing for Lincoln Riley to do for Alex Grinch. But of course, USC fans would say, are we really putting the best product on the field? Are we really putting ourselves in the best possible position to win? And it's not easy to answer those questions in the affirmative, which is exactly why this move is getting scrutiny and will get a ton of scrutiny over the next 8 months on into September and the start of the regular season. So what everyone can agree on for USC in light of the decision to officially retain Alex Grinch is that they need to hit the portal. Like, USC is not there in terms of having the bodies and having the quality needed to create that significant upgrade on defense. Now, at linebacker, one can make the argument that USC is pretty set because you have Shane Lee coming back. Let's remember that Romello Height, who was injured, the transfer from Auburn, didn't get to play much this past season. He comes back from injury. So like, you're basically adding a player who did not play he didn't play barely at all last season. So that is like adding a player when you get an injured player back. Then you have Mason Cobb. You have Eric Gentry coming back. Like, the linebacker room actually looks pretty good, but on the defensive line, number 1, and in the secondary, number 2, Mekhi Blackman leaving. You do not have the bodies right now. You do not have the talent right now to field a significantly improved defense. I would say that the most important player and also the most interesting player on USC's defense as we head into the offseason and spring ball and the ramp up to next season, Corey Foreman, because he is in the middle of so many different mysteries and questions, right? Because Dante Williams brought him in under Clay Helton. So like, you have a Dante Williams connection, you have a Clay Helton connection, and then Alex Grinch had a year with him and didn't really develop him. So like, Corey Foreman is connected to just about everyone in USC's circle of existence over the past 2 years, not just one. And so like, okay, so the previous regime didn't develop him. So that's on Clay Helton. So Alex Grinch, was supposed to make him a much better player. How much fault do we assign to Grinch? How much fault do we assign to just the fact that Corey Foreman wasn't fully healthy? And how much do we assign to Corey Foreman himself, just not being as good a prospect? And of course, Mark, as we're following all these bouncing balls, these moving parts, we then have to bring up the point of, all right, so Dante Williams recruited Corey Foreman. That was a notch on Dante Williams' belt. But if Lincoln Riley now standing pat with his coaching staff, not hiring the special teams coordinator, there are a lot of USC fans, and it's a very reasonable view. So like, I'm not really expressing disagreement, although I do think that they should have hired a special teams coordinator. But like, I don't have a fundamental argument with the larger point that, hey, Dante Williams is a good recruiter. He's brought a lot of value to USC as a recruiter, specifically on the defensive side of the ball. But if we litigate the player Corey Foreman specifically, like, do we give Dante Williams credit still for landing him? Because USC needs to turn him into a stud. He needs to become a star, or at least a highly productive role player in 2023 in order for Dante Williams to get the credit, which enables us to continue to hold Dante Williams in high enough esteem as a recruiter such that the decision to retain Dante Williams for his recruiting contains more value than hiring a special teams coordinator. So like there are so many moving parts here, and Corey Foreman to me stands at the middle of them. He really stands out to me as the most important defensive player for USC in 2023, not just for his own sake, but because what he does has a connection to the previous regime and also to the decisions and the player development track record of the current regime. So Corey Foreman doing well in 2023, it would validate Dante Williams, it would validate Lincoln Riley, it would validate Alex Grinch. A lot on the line with Corey Foreman and his particular development at USC in 2023. It's really a storyline that knits together so many threads for the Trojans.
Matt, maybe I'm reaching for something that's not there, but when Lincoln Riley left Oklahoma, goes to USC, and there's so much change there, there's so much to take on. There is, he's not taking over a ready-made situation in any such way. He's taking on a blue blood elite brand that needs a reclamation project. Maybe he knew in the back of his mind that there was a high probability that Alex Grinch would not eventually be the best defensive coordinator that he could have at USC, but to kind of help him transition to USC, knowing that I'm an offensive guy, I've worked well with this guy, he's been loyal, he's been there, I'm going to bring him with me, give him a shot, and it's just going to make my transition a little bit easier than completely hiring a new staff. I don't know.
I mean, that's possible that Lincoln Riley didn't want to have like a personality conflict with a defensive coordinator. I will say that, and this was part of the Riley files, our Oklahoma insider on that 12-part podcast series. He did say point blank that Lincoln Riley is loyal to a certain set of guys. And he predicted, and that prediction's already come true, there's going to come a point in time at his USC tenure when that loyalty is going to be tested, and he needs to choose between being loyal to his guys, his circle, and doing the thing that maximizes his chances of winning championships, of lifting USC to the highest level. And this is where we have to introduce Mike Bohn and bring him into the conversation. I think that, Mike Bohn, he gave Lincoln Riley the keys to the kingdom at USC. And I mean, like, that was part of the discussion when, Lincoln Riley left Oklahoma 14 months ago. So, like, if you're Mike Bohn and you're trying to lure Lincoln Riley to USC away from Oklahoma, you're certainly going to tell him, hey, this is your program. You have control. But I am sure that in the past week, after the loss to Tulane in the Cotton Bowl, that Mike Bohn has had some sort of conversation with Lincoln Riley, which boils down to, all right, your show, you're running it. I trust you. I'm going to let you, double down, run it back with Alex Grinch, without a special teams coordinator. You get to make these decisions. But like, we need to see the payoff, pal. We need to see the results this year. And so, like, I'm sure, like, Mike Bohn's no dummy. I'm sure that he said, all right, fine, I'm going to give you this second year in which you get to make all the executive decisions for one more round. But then if we don't get the results, like, then we need an intervention. Then we need, some different personnel, different methodologies as we move into the Big Ten. So, and that's the other thing, that you're moving to the Big Ten 1 year from now. So it really, 2023 sets up as a situation where, we either enter the Big Ten with a ton of momentum, or we enter the Big Ten, needing to really reassess. And like, that is a natural point at which to restructure your staff if you're going to do it. So like that, as I think about it and as I weigh and juggle all these considerations in my mind, okay, like we're going to close out the Pac-12 era, running it back, reinforcing what we try to do, reinforcing what Lincoln Riley truly wants in his heart of hearts for a coaching staff. And then we get to evaluate the results in 2023, and then we'll see where we are. And if the results aren't up to standard, well, then a house cleaning's a coming for Lincoln Riley, and he's going to have to make very uncomfortable choices.
I see a college football coaching staff, because of the limitations on the number allowed, much like, let's say, a Major League Baseball pitching staff, where there's a certain formula that's acceptable and the approach of almost everyone. And then there may be an outlier or two based on certain strengths and weaknesses where they carry, instead of 5 starters, maybe 6 starters, and then more or less in the bullpen, and so forth and so on. So I got to think that there's a very cut and dry formula to coaching staffs in college football in terms of where these resources are allocated. And for everybody else in the nation, one of those slots is reserved for a special teams coordinator.
Well, I mean, Lincoln Riley's been very clear. Like, give Lincoln Riley this much. Like, he doesn't try and hide it. Like, he just says, like, special teams is just a small portion of practice time and practice sessions and drills. And why do I have to dedicate one of my precious 10 on-field assistant spots to this? Now, one could make the argument that, behind the scenes, USC should be in a position to, petition the NCAA or whatever the particular authority is in terms of the governing body, in terms of regulating that rule. Let's get rid of that limitation. Why limit it to 10? Let's push it to 11 or 12. Then USC could just add a special teams coordinator on top of that. That's kind of a sidebar, but it's still worth noting for this conversation that, there has been some discussion. There has been some push and pull. I don't know what like the political status of such a petition or movement actually is behind the scenes. I don't know what the status is, but like, I know that's been talked about, to get rid of that artificial rule on a number of on-field assistants. But that point aside, Lincoln Riley currently believes that it's just not that important. And I think a lot of Lincoln Riley's critics will come back to him and say, all right, you don't think a special teams coordinator is important. Why aren't you at least getting the defensive side of the ball solved? Why is the gap between, and of course, this was throughout his tenure at Oklahoma, like I'm fully aware of it. Why is the gap between Lincoln Riley's coaching on offense and defense, so like the Grand Canyon almost every season? We see just how detail-oriented Lincoln Riley is on offense, and then you look at his defenses, and all that attention to detail is missing on that side of the ball. It's just opposite sides of the coin. That it shouldn't have to be that way, and that reality shouldn't have to persist, but it does, and that really annoys. It annoyed Oklahoma fans even when Lincoln Riley was winning Big 12 championships there, because it would show up in the playoff semifinals late in the season. And now USC fans got that full Lincoln Riley taste. All the brilliance on offense, but then those late season big game defensive implosions. And you just ask yourself, hey, Lincoln Riley's really, really good. There's no doubt about that. But there's this persistent flaw, and it's a big one, and it's out there, and it gets exposed in a very public way every December and or early January. And you wonder, when is Lincoln Riley going to just make that change internally where he devotes the requisite amount of focus and attention to the defensive side of the ball to get this thing fixed? And that's the question that's going to follow him into 2023. And we'll see if doubling down on the current strategy, the current methodology, the current coaching staff is going to work for him. It's going to be fascinating.
The two teams that led the nation in field goal attempts this year, numbers 1 and 2 in the nation, Michigan and Georgia. So it's not all bad attempting field goals. You can be successful attempting field goals, apparently. I didn't expect to see that when I pulled it up. I just thought I would reference that first and foremost versus how many USC has, and I'll look that up in just a second. But I agree with Lincoln Riley in that special teams is not as important to football as it once was. And I've outlined the reasons that at least I've come to that conclusion. Number one, the kickoff has been taken out of play to a large extent. All you have to do, folks, is go to college football statistics and look up the number of kickoff returns in the game today. Just look at the number for all the teams in the nation, how many kickoff returns they returned this season. Go back 10 years and look at the numbers. You will see a stark contrast because the powers that be want to take the injury factor out of it, want to make the sport safer. The kickoff return is a fairly dangerous play, and they've incentivized it by, number one, bringing the ball out to the 25-yard line first and foremost, and then more recently, regardless of where you catch it, bringing the ball out to the 25-yard line. So not just the touchback, any ball that's caught within the 25-yard line is brought out to the 25. So it's free yardage. Secondly, these punters have become so good at, number one, the style of punting with the rugby punting, sprinting to the right, kicking it downfield where it's difficult to get your hands on it and return it, number one. Number two, even the more traditional guys boom it higher and deeper than ever before. Therefore, it makes less sense to return it. Point number three is blocked field goals, or blocked punts, I should say, are not nearly as much part of the game as they were at one point, because the risk reward is simply not just a smart play to make. Even though they're fun plays to watch, the risk reward is just not there unless you can master it like Notre Dame did this year.
Yeah, and I would also add that just, analytics being what they are, you are seeing coaches being much more aggressive on fourth down than they were in the 1980s.
Absolutely.
That is an obvious culture shift. In 40 years ago, early 1980s, that was the era of Herschel Walker, Bo Jackson. It was still a running back driven sport. The Woody Hayes, Bo Schembechler ideal of 3 yards in a cloud of dust, defense, running game, be fundamentally sound, in the kicking game. That was still the prevailing methodology in college football, and appropriately so. It was a very different game. We didn't have Mike Leach yet. We didn't have Steve Spurrier yet. We didn't have those guys, revolutionizing the passing game. And so, having great special teams really did matter. Like Georgia under Vince Dooley, like Kevin Butler, Rex Robinson, elite kickers, elite kicking game, married with the defense, married with Herschel. That's why Georgia won 3 straight SEC titles, won a national title, had 4 straight years finishing in the top 5, top 6. That was how you won back then. And today it's a very different deal. So I can understand that. But I would say, and to kind of continue this conversation, and I might have hinted at this point in past shows here at the Voice of College Football, but let me just state it more directly. With the athletes that USC has, and more specifically with the offensive playmakers USC has, a guy like Raleek Brown, other, really speedy guys with great natural talent. You think about Reggie Bush, under Pete Carroll. You need to unlock those guys on kick returns. Whoever you choose to put back there, when you have lightning in a bottle, and you have the chance on a punt return or just a kick return in general to get a 90-yard kick return, an elite special teams coach, a guy who is really on top of the details, just getting 1 or 2 90-yard kick returns for a touchdown over the course of a season, especially if that comes in a big game against Utah, Washington, Oregon, Notre Dame, the value add of just 1 or 2 really big plays in key moments. That's the point of emphasis. In a big moment, when you can deliver a huge special teams play, that changes seasons. And I did mention in our last show last Thursday here at the Voice of College Football that, if Notre Dame getting Sam Hartman at quarterback, well, that game in South Bend, that's going to be a bear. That is going to be a really tough game for USC. And so if there's a special teams mismatch against Brian Mason, the Notre Dame super duper special teams coach, and the game's decided by 7 points, and it comes down to Notre Dame getting a 60-yard return here and a block punt over there, like Lincoln Riley is he is tempting fate. Now maybe the offense is going to be so good that it doesn't matter, but what did we see this season? We saw that as great as the offense is, the margins are always so small because of the defense, and that puts you in a situation where one special teams miscue, Mario Williams in the Cotton Bowl, can tip the scales. And so, so you're right, Mark. Special teams and kicks in general and kickoffs in particular, not as prevalent as they once were. It's very downscaled. And yet, it was a kickoff miscue that really hurt USC in the Cotton Bowl. And so, even though it's a smaller percentage of plays, that you need to have to get it right when it's there. You need to get it right in the big moments. And I just philosophically don't believe with the idea of winging it on anything. Like, you shouldn't wing it on defense. That's why you make a run at Jim Leonard instead of retaining Alex Grinch. But again, we've kind of litigated that point. Like, Lincoln Riley wasn't bringing Alex Grinch to LA for 1 year. He was always going to be at least 2, to give him some space and also stock the roster with more talent. But again, there is a philosophy here. Like, it's not just, a knee-jerk look at, bad results. There's also the reality that USC is sitting on so much talent, so much potential. Why wouldn't you want to unlock that talent in each instance of a special teams return of a kick?
Yeah, so for example, here, Ohio University led the nation in kickoff returns with 56. And go back 10 years, and there are 49 teams in college football that had at least 56 kickoff returns. So it has changed quite a bit. However, we are, back to your point, talking about kickoff returns, kickoff coverage, punt returns, punt coverage, field goals, field goal PATs as well. You're talking about so many different aspects that aren't similar skill sets. You've got all sorts of different, you've got long snappers, you've got holders, you've got both punters and place kickers, you've got coverage people, you've got return people. And so to just kind of spitball all of those different roles just doesn't seem like the best move to me.
Yeah, I mean that's where we are. But we go back to, and I think we've this particular part of our conversation tonight has run its course. What everyone can agree on: got to get better quality, got to get better talent, and also better attention to detail. And like even Alex Grinch would admit readily that attention to detail just wasn't where it needed to be. And so that, as we go into a second full off season, and that might also be the thing that Lincoln Riley was counting on, that getting a second off season, obviously the first off season, you had so much transfer portal movement that, and so many new faces that, assembling all of that, getting it all together, was going to be difficult. And it was. But now, like with the Shane Lees and the Eric Gentrys and the players who are returning for a second year, well, first off, they need to be going to the weight room. So maybe the strength and conditioning piece of the puzzle gets a little more clarity. It becomes solidified more with a second year, having a season to look back on within the Alex Grinch system and seeing, where and how we need to get stronger, tougher, more muscular. Utah was able to just pound Eric Gentry into sand in the Pac-12 championship game. So, a year ago, it was, well, these guys were playing under Clay Helton and then Dante Williams and Todd Orlando last season. Now, last season is an Alex Grinch season. So there is a belief, and it makes a certain degree of sense that with continuity, the process of the coaching staff evaluating, what was deficient about last year's players, it's now a much more in-house thing. You're not looking at a Dante Williams, Todd Orlando season as your comparative measuring stick. You're looking at an Alex Grinch season as your measuring stick, and that could maybe help Grinch and Riley and the rest of the defensive staff make better evaluations and improve their process of player development.
All right, the voice of college football talks USC with all of you each and every week. And of course, Matt Zemek's the guy that makes it all happen here. You can catch his work every day at Trojans Wire. And again, we are here typically every Monday, but of course, with the national championship game being played this week, we moved our show to Tuesday, but it's every Monday at 11 Eastern and 8 Pacific. And speaking of the national championship game, and of course, the connection to one Lincoln Riley would be little brother Garrett, running that TCU defense that ran out of magic pixie dust and Max Duggan on Monday night against that vaunted Georgia defense.
Yeah, well, Garrett Riley might not have had a good night, but he has one more bad night in national championship games than Lincoln Riley does, because Lincoln Riley hasn't had a national championship night of any kind. And that really gets to something that I wrote at Trojans Wire earlier on Tuesday, Mark, and that is that, USC fans, obviously, national championships are the expectation. They're the standard. That's where this program is expected to go under Lincoln Riley. But I think in a short-term context, like obviously 2, 3, 4 years from now, yeah, you will expect to have one national championship under your belt. And I know that non-USC fans are laughing at that. Ha, ha, ha. Like, you'll never get there. Not with the SEC axis of evil. But my point is, on this season and perhaps 2024, the focus should be less on winning the national championship. I mean, again, USC expects to be there. USC expects to get there eventually. But I think we can pretty well say, pretty confidently, that USC is not going to have the depth that you see at Georgia. It's not going to have the depth that you see at Alabama in 2023. Like, it's going to getting to the playoff, like that is going to be the definite expectation for 2023. But playoff all the way to national title, like we saw how big a jump that is for TCU. Got to the playoff, won a semifinal, but 58 points short against Georgia. We saw the difference, and the recruiting rankings. That was obviously a big talking point heading into TCU Georgia, that TCU was trying to break all the rules, all the historical norms, and the laws of averages in terms of recruiting classes, winning the national title. But for USC fans, like, the point of encouragement here, and again, this is what I wrote about, like, being number 2 is pretty attainable right now in college football. Being number 1 is going to be really hard, and it's probably going to take multiple seasons. But being number 2, that's actually reachable. And part of what I outlined in my piece, when you go to Trojans Wire, trojanswire.usatoday.com, part of what I was illustrating is that, Alabama had a down year. Now, Alabama's not going to have a down year every year, like this one. Like, this was not it was not very representative of the kind of year that Nick Saban normally has. But if you have a season in which Alabama or Georgia, one of the two, not both, just one, if one of the two isn't on top of its game, you have Ohio State, questioning itself under Ryan Day. I mean, and USC and Ohio State are really in very similar positions, because you have the all-world Star Wars offense, and you have a defense with a lot of flaws, a defense which is soft, a defense with holes. USC and Ohio State are really on very similar ground. Michigan, we don't know what's going to happen with Jim Harbaugh, but we saw that, Michigan couldn't beat this TCU team that got ragdolled by Georgia. That certainly made Michigan look a lot worse in terms of, our overview at the end of the season. And then we also have to look at Clemson and how Dabo Swinney, he could be losing his touch. Maybe not profoundly or dramatically, but certainly enough to, be a notch lower than that really high bar that we saw from him 2015 through 2019, when Clemson was making the national championship game almost every year. The only reason Clemson didn't make it in 2017 was that it played Alabama in the semifinals instead of the national championship game. So if one of Alabama or Georgia is not really crushing it in a given season, what's happening at Ohio State, Michigan, and Clemson leads us to the possibility that became a reality this year with TCU, that you can get to number 2 if you are in the semifinal opposite an elite Georgia team or an elite Alabama team. In the year when Kirby Smart or Nick Saban puts it all together, and that's the number 1 seed, if you can get into a 2 versus 3 semifinal on the other half of the bracket, and you're not playing Saban or Kirby this year, 2022, this season, which just ended, showed us number 2 in the country is very attainable. If USC had beaten Utah, it would have been USC against Michigan in the Fiesta Bowl, with TCU losing the Big 12 championship game to Kansas State. So, USC versus Michigan, having 4 weeks off, having 4 weeks to get healthy. I mean, I'm not going to say, USC obviously would have won, but you obviously look at how Michigan played against TCU and you say that game was certainly gettable for USC if the Trojans had gotten there. So getting all the way to number 1, winning a national championship game against, the elite 13-0, 14-0, Nick Saban or Kirby Smart juggernaut, you're not going to do that in 2023 if you're USC or if you're another team, in that second tier just below the SEC Goliaths. But getting to number 2, that's pretty reasonable. And of course, for Lincoln Riley, a guy who's never made a college football playoff national championship game, like that would be a really good thing to accomplish in 2023. So it's just a fascinating tension point raised by Georgia's demolition of TCU that, number 1, probably not attainable for USC this year or even in 2024, but number 2, very attainable. And it might seem counterintuitive to say, well, if you can, number 2 is right there in front of you and number 1 is almost impossible. But in many ways, I think that's where we are in college football, because there was a ton of parity this season, but there was one team that really, stood above the crowd. You could make the argument that it was Georgia and Ohio State, that they were the 2 best teams. They certainly were the 2 most talented teams. I don't think anyone would dispute that after the Peach Bowl that we saw. But in terms of like getting to number 2 as a realistic goal, that is very attainable, as long as one of Georgia or Alabama are not really, really on top of their game within that given season.
And the dynamic of that, of course, changes with USC joining the Big Ten and playing within the same league as 2 of those, other elite programs. So that will, and what I would expect is also going to come out this year, this off season, that will be intriguing is in 2024, we've got a new Big Ten. Well, this particular off season, I would expect sometime this summer, possibly, for it to be released as to what is the scheduling format going to look like in that new Big Ten.
It's a huge question. It's a huge question.
And we're getting a hint from Kevin Warren that there won't be divisions, and there will be something similar to what the ACC has drawn up in a 3-5-5 format for the Big Ten. That would be 16 teams, so it could be some kind of 3-6-6 format in regards to playing 3 designated rivals, and then having the rest of the league split into 2 groups in which you alternate playing those 2 groups of teams each year, but you play the 3 designated rivals each and every year.
Yeah, and obviously we know that USC and UCLA are going to be partners, and then you're probably going to look at 2 teams on the western geographical edge of the conference as the other 2 consistent partners. I would say, like, I'm not going to predict like everything about the projected Big Ten schedule, but I'm going to be fairly confident in saying that Iowa is going to be a regular dance partner for USC. And I say that not just because Iowa's a little more to the west of the Big Ten footprint, but also because there's history there. There's a long historical linkage there. Howard Jones and his defensive coordinator and Trojan legend Sam Barry, they both had Iowa roots. So I think the Big Ten is going to find it pretty irresistible to make sure that USC and Iowa are partners. I wouldn't be too surprised if USC and Nebraska were also partners, but I think that Iowa in particular, because of the history that connects the Trojans and the Hawkeyes, that's going to be one regular schedule partner when we get into the Big Ten.
Okay. Interesting. Because I drew up a scheduling format for the new 16-team Big Ten that I've yet to fully craft. So we were just starting on that.
It's a great off-season project for sure.
Yes,
we got to find things to do over the next 8 months.
Yes, and we've got a lot of them. So maybe I'll show everyone a peek of all sorts of content lists that we've got planned here at the Voice of College Football over the next several months. We just released our top 25 that actually makes sense, and we will expand that to a 1 through 131 here in the next few days as I apply that same approach to resume and track record evaluation to the entire scope of college football and rank all the teams 1 through 131. All right. Tim, have you seen the guys coming? I don't think. I was talking about an upgrade to defensive line upgrade.
A major upgrade. Well, Tim, I think at linebacker, you have some significant depth and quality. But in terms of all three position groups, that is a wait and see. And I think the point I would stress, Tim, is player development. Maybe you think about year one and trying to make this coaching staff had to evaluate which players were going to stay and which players were going to go. They asked a lot of players to leave so they could bring a lot of players in through the portal. And so that was an extra layer on Alex Grinch's plate, Lincoln Riley's plate this past off season in spring ball and on into the summer. So you don't have that extra layer. You're still making decisions about who stays, who goes, but you're now basing it on your own evaluation of players in your system, as opposed to just looking at 2021 tape under Clay Helton, Dante Williams, and Todd Orlando. So I think that process of evaluation should be quicker. And so there should be more time really getting the players that you have, especially those who are returning, to perform at a much higher level. So player development, there's still a significant player acquisition process that needs to happen in the portal. As something I've stated before, you still have to get the bodies and the depth and the talent at a higher level. But, assuming that you can do that to a certain extent, the major upgrade, Tim, is going to be getting players on a faster developmental curve, because we didn't see progression through the course of the season. We didn't see players getting better as the season went along. Certainly not after the Utah game in mid-October. The second half of the season was a period of regression, not improvement, for most of the players on this USC defense. So really, the player development piece for this staff, that's going to play a role. It's not going to be the only factor, but it's going to be one pretty centrally significant factor in determining just how big an upgrade this new influx of talent is.
Roger Dodger, we know Alex Grinch can't take a historically bad defense in 2021 and make it much better at all by coaching. So USC needs auto defensive players that coach themselves. You got to think, if they took one aspect of defense, and that be tackling in and of itself.
Really?
there are so many different facets to defense, but take just one, tackling. And I don't know what the metrics say about what a competent or capable defense looks like in terms of tackling, what that percentage is, but I know that USC was far below that, and they merely improved the tackling to be capable.
And I think the point that's worth mentioning here is that USC, you could see, and a lot of people who followed the team this past season, they would tell you that Alex Grinch taught players to, make tackles or at least attack ball carriers in a way that forced turnovers. And of course, that was the one, really redeeming quality of this defense. It was forcing turnovers. It was ball hawking, having a nose for the ball, having a way to get takeaways. Well, so Alex Grinch really needs to step back and reconsider how he's teaching players, because as great as it was to get all those turnovers and all those takeaways over the course of the season, like, you need to realize that, okay, what happens when you go up against an opponent that doesn't turn it over? What happens when you go up against a rock solid physical team like Utah? Utah's the team that solved USC, beat the Trojans twice. What happens when Utah is not giving you the ball? What happens when Cam Rising, who, by the way, he's returning for another season? What happens when Cam Rising does not throw that interception that you're counting on? Maybe it's a calculus of, well, you actually shouldn't count on getting that turnover too much. Like, you try for it. You obviously want to get it, but you really shouldn't bake it into your formula quite as much as Alex Grinch might have done this past season. You need to emphasize teaching for the takeaway less, and you need to emphasize, making the sure tackle more. I definitely think that there has to be a rebalancing of that particular tension point for Alex Grinch at USC.
It sounds much like a power hitting baseball lineup that swings and misses way too much, that when it faces inferior pitching can look mighty impressive because they can feast on bad pitching. But when it faces laser sharp pitching, then you would rather have a lot more contact guys than you would the home run hitters in the line.
To use a particular baseball turn of phrase, sometimes you have to go the other way. That phrasing applies on numerous levels here.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. All right, folks, we appreciate you being here. Of course, bring some friends with you next week as we are here each and every, again, Monday night. Monday is the night, Monday at 8 Pacific time. Yes, Tim has left the link in the chat to Trojans Wire, so check out Matt's work right there. And
we're gonna be writing a lot about Alex Grinch the next several days. You can make an easy bet on that one.
Yeah, did those turnovers did they come in greater quantities? It seems like it, without me going through game by game. It seemed like they came in greater quantities earlier in the season as well.
Yeah, first 5 weeks, and of course, especially in the Oregon State game where they had the 4 interceptions of Chance Nolan against the Beavers, and the gusher, it was flowing through those first 5 games through Arizona State in Week 5 on October 1. Against Washington State, that's when the turnover faucet began to dry up a little. Got a lot of turnovers from DTR and UCLA later in the season, but really from Week 6 against Washington State on October 8th through the Cal game, that section of the season, that's when the turnover faucet really began to dry up for USC.
So, folks, in addition to checking out Matt's work at Trojans Wire, I had alluded to a lot of off-season content that we were hoping to get to here at the Voice of College Football. And, I'll present a number of these once I post these and present these to Matt to get his thoughts on conference rankings. What we're in the process of doing, Matt, is I'm taking all the Power 5 results from this past season, and I'm not just going by record, because records can be deceiving. I'm putting the games into context based on the seeded matchups, the seeds, and I'm weighting the games based on the seedings, either raising the weight of the game because it was a seeded matchup that favored one side or the other, or it takes away. And so we're going to look at conference rankings. We're going to break down the conferences. Again, 1 through 131 rankings are coming later this week. We're going to look at our way too early top 25. Going to review the first-year head coaches, guys like Dan Lanning and others, and how they did in their first year, and rank their first-year performances. The new hire coaches as well, Luke Fickell, Matt Rule, and others throughout the country, and how we rate them as we look forward to the 2023 season. You've got the best non-conference matchups. Who could be the next TCU? I know a lot of people love Florida State emerging this next season. So we'll look at some of those candidates to be the next dark horse to break up the college football playoff party. And as we had talked about just a few minutes ago, a lot of scheduling proposals out there with the SEC adding Oklahoma, Texas, the Big Ten, USC, UCLA. The Big 12 has to release its opponents and schedule for this next season. So there's a lot to think about there as well. So a lot of good stuff there.
One thing we have to mention before we close up shop here, Mark, is just that Cam Rising returning, Brant Queethy returning at tight end for Utah. Like, everyone on Utah of significance is coming back, or just almost everyone at least.
Yeah.
So you have a fully loaded Utah. You have Washington coming back with Michael Penix, Bo Nix returning, Coach Prime getting things rolling at Colorado. Like, the Pac-12, I mean, it is hard to think about a preseason or an off season in recent memory when the Pac-12 had this much buzz, this much national attention. Like, the Pac-12 is not a punching bag. And the funny thing, Mark, or at least the strange thing, is that, like, the Pac-12 still found a way to face plant in the bowl season, with UCLA blowing it against Pitt, USC blowing it against Tulane, and Utah getting tossed around Pasadena by Penn State. And yet people aren't talking about that. People aren't talking about those failures because of all the talent and high-end skill, veteran skill from upperclassmen that you're seeing throughout the Pac-12. I mean, this is going to be a fun finale in the Pac-12 before USC and UCLA mosey on over to the Big Ten. It's going to be a fun season. We're going to have there are going to be some great games. Like, that there's going to be some 41-38 thrillers. Like, how can you not have several of them at some point? And Pac-12 football has never been this interesting in a lot of years. So it's going to be a thrill ride.
In a lot of years, no doubt. And despite a 3-4 bowl record, USC and UCLA so very close to making that a 5-2 bowl record if they wouldn't have tripped over themselves down the stretch.
Roger Dodger. Just one thing to say, Roger Dodger. UCLA 62, USC 33. Okay? All right.
All right, everyone. Appreciate you being here. USC Trojans Live. We've done it 37 consecutive weeks only because of this guy, Matt Zemek, Trojans Wire. So check out his work right there covering USC football and athletics on a regular basis. And we'll be back here next Monday night. It's at 11 Eastern and 8 Pacific. Bring yourself, bring others with you, and we'll have a good time. See you next week, Matt. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great week, everybody.